Hello, everyone. It's 12:45, so I'm going to start us off with our first 15-minute hybrid talk. And as you can see, it's called Design for Openness and Curiosity, How Intercultural Learning Informs UDL. And I am your floating head host because I have chosen an outfit that blends in with the background drapes. And so you'll see my head floating across the stage throughout this presentation. My name is Lillian Nave. I'm at Appalachian State University, and I host the Think UDL podcast, where I talk to many folks in higher ed and workforce development about how they implement UDL in their environments. There we go. Okay, so I have been approached a lot lately after the opening ceremony of the Olympics. I am an art historian for my background, and people from all along different parts of my life have reached out to say, what was up with those opening ceremonies of the Summer Olympics in Paris? And they said, with your art history background, can you help me understand what was going on? And I found that that is finally the time that my life as an art historian is validated. But it has also, that background in art history has helped me to really understand what it takes to be interculturally competent, to learn about the stories and cultures of other people. And so I wanted to tell you a story that happened to me just this summer. I was in Estonia, one of the former Baltic republics of the Soviet Union, that is now a free state since 1991. And I had just arrived in Tallinn and needed to get very quickly to my next bus because I was seeing different university partners and had just arrived. Was told there was a new app that one could use in order to call for a taxi and had downloaded it, had tried to get someone to come. It looked like they were coming, but I wasn't sure because it wasn't entirely in English. Everything on that page, on the app page. And then suddenly a car pulls up on the cobblestone streets, and this is what Tallinn looks like. It's a beautiful old medieval town. And in comes this car, and a man jumps out, or he kind of slowly jumps out because he's about 65, white hair, and he says, "Get in." That is all he says to me. And I've got my app and I've got my phone and I'm saying, I need to find this. And he says, "Get in." And I thought, I'm going to get in because I am afraid. And I don't know if I'm being kidnapped. And so I sat in the back of this car, could not figure out if we were going to the place that we were supposed to go to. I had just gotten in the country, had to get on my next mode of transport, and was incredibly scared that I had gotten in the back of the wrong car and somebody had just taken me to I don't know where. And I totally thought that this was my last, my last day and I had been completely kidnapped. Well, that's not exactly what happened, but that was my first impression. So I want to hold that story for right now because we need to learn about how to act and react in these types of situations that are uncomfortable and maybe confusing. And for that, I want to have you take a look at a different picture. This is something called the Mueller-Lyer illusion. And I want you to look at these two lines. They're two vertical parallel lines, and one has converging arrow points and one has diverging arrow points. And I want you to just tell the person next to you, which one do you think is bigger or larger or longer? Or are they the same size? Now, some of you may have seen this before. The Mueller-Lyer illusion is something that a lot of psychologists and others will use to see what people think that they see. And in truth, these two lines are the exact same size. However, the fact that they have converging or diverging arrowheads on either end gives the illusion to us that one of them is longer. And I always sort of wondered, well, why is it that we think one of those is longer? And this illustration, which is of some folks at a interior, buying some tickets at a movie theater, shows the same two lines, one with converging arrow points and one with diverging. And the fact that we often, many of us, will think that the one line with diverging arrow points is longer is because we have grown up in a world of carpeted corners. That means we grew up in rooms. Did you grow up in a room? Did it have a corner? Did you grow up indoors? And there's a lot of research that tells us that those folks, people who grew up inside houses with corners, will make that one recede in the background, and therefore it tells our brain that it's much taller because it's further away. And so we know that it is longer. And the one that's closer up seems shorter. So because we, or some of us, grew up in that way, our brain has been making those connections for us for our entire lives. But those people who grew up with maybe spent much more time in nature, spent a lot of time outdoors, didn't have corners, carpeted corners in their rooms, are less likely to fall for that illusion because that ingraining in our brains has not happened. And I think this is very much a metaphor for our cultural understanding. And what you see on the screen now is two men, one who reaches out a hand to shake hands, the other is bowing. And this is to illustrate the idea that we have some ingrained ideas, like what is a greeting? If you're about to meet someone, do you automatically put your hand out to shake hands? Now, post-COVID, you might use an elbow or a fist bump. But for the most part, in the Western world, this is what we do, without even thinking about it. But if you have two people from different cultures, they're going to automatically think that their way is the right way in this greeting. So that there's a lot that happens in our minds that are outside of our conscious awareness, and we often act on these assumptions that we don't realize that we're making. Like when we assume that one line is much longer than the other. And so that's where intercultural competence comes in. So what is intercultural competence? It's a set of cognitive and affective and behavioral skills and characteristics that support effective and appropriate interaction in a variety of contexts. And you might think, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Well, what that means is that there's a mindset, a skill set, and a heart set that are all part of intercultural competence. What's a mindset? That's knowledge. When you have an objective, you want your students to learn some things. That's knowledge. A skill set are abilities. We want them to demonstrate a particular ability when we ask them to do an assignment. And finally, a heart set, or attitudes. And this is where I think this diverges from a lot of our education speak and what we look for in assessments, is we don't try to understand or teach for or have an objective of an attitude. And for intercultural competence, we have in higher ed, and I work in the higher ed space, AACU, which is the Association of American Colleges and Universities, has put together a bunch of rubrics, value rubrics, and value stands for a valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education. And they have one on intercultural competence. And that intercultural competence value rubric says we need to have knowledge, so we need to know about our own culture and others. We need to have some skills. We need to have empathy and understand the difference in verbal and nonverbal communication, just like those two men who were greeting each other, and attitudes. And this is the thing that I think we need to apply to UDL. Attitudes are curiosity and openness. And so you might think, okay, but how do I have an objective of curiosity or an objective of openness? How do I have a SMART goal, right? How can I know if that's been achieved? So I wanted to talk briefly about how do we quantify these attitudes. Curiosity. How can we even understand that now someone has gained some curiosity? Well, for curiosity, are we asking our students, and do we see them ask complex questions about anything? about others in particular circumstances, about the situation. That's curiosity. Are they asking questions? And so that's the first thing that we can look for. The second thing that we can look for curiosity is seeking out answers that reflect multiple perspectives. So curiosity means we're going to start asking questions and try to find some answers that reflect multiple perspectives. So let's go back to my story. If I were to apply that curiosity, I could start asking some questions, like, why did he say get in like that? Why did this presumable cab driver say that? It's possible that he doesn't have a great understanding of English. I don't speak Estonian, and in the week that I spent in Estonia, I found out that about 30% of Estonians are Russian speakers, and up until 30 years ago, it was a Russian or a Soviet and controlled by Russian state. And so this man grew up with 30 years of being Russian, and then only later in his midlife was Estonian even kind of required or introduced. And now recently, since the war in Ukraine, English is now required, has been required, but now Russian is not taught in schools. So there's a big change in language. So it's quite possible that he didn't have a great understanding of English. He looked at me and thought, she doesn't know Russian, probably. And so if I were curious and started asking questions, I might have thought, maybe there's a reason why he said it like that. Maybe he wasn't sure how to address me. Also, different cultural understandings, like I would have spent a lot more time finessing or figuring out what's going on, and this is a very gruff, I'm here to do a job, let's do the job. There's no other pleasantries, and that's also a big cultural difference. So if I were to start asking some more questions, I might not have been in the predicament that I thought I was in, which was being kidnapped. Now, curiosity in the AACU value rubric has 4 levels. The benchmark, so you can think about this like freshman through senior year, or first year through senior year. Again, this is for intercultural competence, but it moves into the capstone level 4, which is to ask complex questions about other cultures and seek out and articulate answers to these questions that reflect multiple cultural perspectives. But what about openness? How do we quantify that? And there are 2 ways. We can develop interactions with others. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the key part, is suspend judgment when valuing interactions with others. What does that mean? This is the most important thing. And that is, I needed to suspend judgment when I was in this situation, because I made a judgment that this guy is mean, awful, rude, evil, trying to kidnap me. And that was all an assumption that was completely wrong and baseless. But I had made a judgment against this person because he was different and he interacted with me in a different way. I was in a different place, in a very different language, and all of those things. And so if we can stop our judgment when we are in these situations, then we can be much more open to other ways of seeing a situation or doing things. So openness ends in this capstone on the far left, is about initiating and developing interactions with others and suspending that judgment in those interactions. So what does this have to do with teaching? Well, I'll tell you one final story. When I was teaching art history, I would lecture, and I thought I was pretty entertaining, and I tried to keep everybody interested, and I saw students doodling in their notebook. And that's not what I do. But I made a judgment that this student wasn't paying attention. It was only later that I found out that there were many ways for a student to actually concentrate. One of those is doodling, for them to really be listening to what was going on. So if I suspended my judgment that was based on my assumptions and my beliefs and my culture, I am much better able to be open to somebody else's way of doing and being. And I think we need to always keep that in mind as we move through designing and implementing learning experiences for our students. And I hope your journey is wonderful, but the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single shift. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for this presentation because I'm from Barcelona, Spain, so now you are more open to understand that I have some limits on my languages and my communication. But yeah, I'm so excited. My name is Marta Sanz, and we are coming here with my colleague Xavi to explain a little bit and to tell something about how we implement UDL-based programs for inclusion, literacy, and STEAM. So, I'm gonna talk, I'm gonna talk about our context in Barcelona, our vulnerable context in Barcelona, what and how we do in our programs, and also I wanted to share the limitations that we faced, and also share the reflections and discussions. So, we live in Barcelona. Barcelona is a city located in the northeast part of Spain, bordering with France, and it's a very cool city, right? Most of you maybe have been there. It's in the sea, and we are the fourth most visited city in Europe and in the top 20 of the world. And we also are unique for our blend of culture, architecture, history, beaches, climate, etc. We also host many companies, especially also for scientific and technological companies. And we are now hosting around 500 companies that are developing AI systems, and also many companies such as Meta, Amazon, Google have now located their data centers in Barcelona. So that's great, right? But it could have not been such a fairy tale, right? So at the same time, Barcelona has an annual income per capita around 18,300 euros, so it's really bad, right? And we also just have a public investment in education around 3.5% related to the GDP. We also are facing this staggering number of children that are living in poverty, around 32%. And as you can see, this is, according to the data that we have, this is much than the double that the one that you have here in the United States. And we are one of significantly higher than the mean of the rest of European countries. So, with all that said, we start to think how to pinpoint to arrive the children and empower and making some programs to foster equity and giving them more opportunities. And we start to work with administration to target our population. So they made a high complexity or a tax for complexity schools based on the percentage of students that had low socioeconomic status in the family, low educational level, high bunch of students with special educational needs, etc. And we, as you can see here, we figured out that it was around 32%, the same as the children that were living in poverty. So that's our target. In our foundation, we try to implement programs and UDL evidence-based program just in this kind of population. And why we are doing this? So as you can see here, we have a 5% of students that are underachieving in low complexity schools, and in contrast, a quarter of the students are underachieving in high complexity schools. So the message is clear. We need to offer more super in the schools that they need, right? So at the foundation, we envision a world that, regardless the context, children have the same opportunities for education to fulfill their potential. And we make this by ensuring quality, So that is inclusive education, early and universal. And by implementing evidence-based programs that we develop based on UDL and children and maker-centered design learning practices. So what and how we do that? Our approach is to foster or to grow collective culture and leadership. We think that this is all about, firstly, about cultures and about values. And maybe it's not the starting point or the opening door, but it's very important to focus on the culture that we have. So in terms of having the sense and the purpose to influence in changes on the practices and making procedures and giving new resources for teachers. So we develop this for everyone, and in early intervention we are focused on K-12 education, and to make it to a systematic and also systemic change in the schools. When we arrive in one school, we stay at least for 3 years to first contextualize, and then the second year transform, and the third year consolidate our changes. And mainly, we do this because we envision a world where education is the elevator for these children, right? So in DLEC program, we try to empower reading and writing as a basis of success in education. In the TOTAS, we foster inclusion education, emphasizing children with neurodiversities. And in the TECLA program, we approach scientific and technological by entering by arts and creating new spaces, maker-centered spaces for learning. So in the TECLA, in DLEC, as already mentioned, our goal is to foster literacy skills in terms of reading and writing, and we have developed a validated tool and a standardized tool for early detecting as many student profiles in order to offer personalized and multi-target intervention. And that's quite a pioneer, because here you have many tools in the United States, but in Catalan language there were nothing before that. So we are attending around 1,500 children. Currently, this school year, we are accompanying 165 teachers, and now we are in 18 schools with this program. We have also proceeded around 2,000 screenings, and based on two concepts: to tracking the evolution and the learning of the students also, and also to see our efficacy and if we are doing in a correct or a good day, if it makes sense or not, right? So our methodology here in the DLEC program is based on these areas that I'm sure that you already know as a teacher. And we have developed this digital platform that enables to multi-target the learning profiles and also many manipulative resources. Here there is a video, just in case some of you are more interested in the program, but I'm going to jump to the results. Here we have some research, because we like to gather data to see which is our impact. And as you can see here, in different areas of reading and writing, there is a significant difference between DLEC intervention group compared to control peer group, in terms of the mean of the difference between the starting point at the beginning of the school year and the end point at the beginning of the year. These results were from 2022-2023, and now currently we are analyzing the results of this school year with this amount of population. So what we do in the TOTAS? In the TOTAS we have a quote that is, education has not quality if it's not for everyone, and the TOTAS means in Catalan, for everyone, right? So we are impacting around 500 children or students in this program, accompanying and giving support to 38 teachers, and we are not piloting this program in 2 schools, and we are proceeding 9 neuropsychological assessment to specific students. And the TOTAS talks about inclusion, universality, and as well, according to Paul Ecluth and all this framework and context, also pinpointing personalization at the same time of universality. So the TOTAS tries to ensure the presence of the students. So the presence means to not be segregated in another school, but also in the same school, but in a separate room, right? So it is about the presence, but also the participation, active participation of the students, and also to ensure that all of our students has a progress no matter their goals of learning are. So we try to do this by changing cultures and changing values, as this is the only way to make a systemic change, and we do this through all the UDL lens. We have many, many materials. We have brochures and some things if you are interested about, like planners and things to regulate executive functionings in the classrooms, and also different kinds of materials. We learned about the journey mapping yesterday a lot, which is a great, great tool. We have something similar of it. And we also are all the time getting data and working and returning back the results to teachers. So here there is some results about the TOTAS. And as you can see here, the blue line or the blue graph is from initial time at this school year, and the green one is at the end of the year. So as you can see, teachers has referred that they have decreased all the barriers, so physical barriers, cognitive, emotional, and sensorial barriers. At the same time, as you can see here, and there is just a slightly improvement on inclusive practices, so we are not happy on it. We have to still work. This is a pilot study, but yeah, still there is a slight growth in inclusive practice and a slight decrease in barriers, but at the same time, and we are expecting that this changes the next level and the next course and the second one and the third one, sorry. But here what we have is, in the meantime, they were increasing inclusive practice and decreasing barriers. They were also thinking that they were less culturally and less having values close to inclusivity. So that's a good thing, right? Because they are growing some awareness that makes them reflect how they are facing or they are trying to get or to address inclusion. And we have the TECLA program, which tomorrow, if some of you are interested in it, we have a workshop specifically just only of TECLA and AI tools that we use for it. But basically, we are now attending around 400 children, accompanying 85 teachers in this program, and we are at 5 schools now and applying around 277 hours of maker-centered projects in classrooms. So this is about how to address science, engineering, maths, and technology as an elevator for social justice, and starting with arts and creativity by making learning experiences centered on maker designs. And as well, do it in a UDL design way of doing. So we also use this very common model of 5E model for during the whole learning experiences that probably you already made. And here there is just a case study as an example about how we do within that project. For example, here we were talking about ancient Egypt, and we were at this phase of engagement. Children were they didn't know, but they were like an anthropologist, and they had to find out some pieces buried on the sand to foster, nurture, joy, and play. And then they discovered that these pieces were figures from ancient Egypt, and we offer all the time different options for building knowledge, and here technology helps us, and AI helps us to create. For example, Nefertiti were explaining to the students many different things. And then at this stage of explanations, we make an environment for discussion between peers, but also we invite experts outside from the school. And we make them elaborate using many different tools, digital and fabrication tools. And also, at this stage of evaluation, we also try to use AI for learning and also for assessing, and then create a community. Here, for example, students were presenting the project to their families as a way to evaluate. And we also, during all this program, again, we gather some data that we will share you tomorrow at the workshop if you are interested. So we think a lot about our programs, of how to get closer to the teachers and facilitate, but also make them easier, because we all know, I think that it is common in the whole world, that the pressure on the teachers and the resources that they receive sometimes are not enough. So we try to make them incorporate new practices and new strategies and new resources, but facilitating a lot. So here you have some surveys about satisfaction on the program, so we are quite proud about it. Our challenge will be to keep it for the next years. And here we have some future challenges that we are facing all the time. In this kind of context, families have many different complexities, so that sometimes affects to the students' participation, to the presence to the schools. So we are trying to engage more the families. We are facing a very high teacher mobility that threats our sustainability of the programs, and we also try to make it systemic and sustainable, but sometimes it's not that good, right? So thank you very much, and I don't know the next. Thank you.
All right, so this is a chat about our experiences in making a variety of science curriculum for the native Alaskan communities up in the far reaches of Alaska. There are a bunch of different tribes up there, but I think primarily Carolyn has been working with the Yupik, right?
We have several different locations. The one we're going to showcase today is Hooper Bay, that's on the Bering Strait. And Hooper Bay is very remote, so it has its own unique set of circumstances.
All right, how do we do the next slide? There we go. Okay, so my name's Leslie Bondarek. This is Carolyn Stout. We're both from a place called the Concord Consortium. We're a think tank and technology, oh, look at that. Technology development organization. We specialize in creating novel software and teaching methodologies, really all about teaching STEM subjects in K-12. And I'm lucky enough to work with lots of talented people like Carolyn, who bring me incredibly bizarre problems that I never really thought that I would ever have to solve in software, like this one. So let's talk about the community that we're addressing.
So Hooper Bay, like I mentioned, is on the Bering Strait. This is a community that goes out and collects eggs. They do seal hunting. They pick lichens for their colors, for their clothing. Everything that they do means they're going to be able to exist in that community over the next year. So it's really a challenging situation, especially with the severe weather. They not only had Merbok, which was an unbelievable storm that removed all the dunes that protects the community. It's already been moved once, but they also have severe temperatures. The last time I was there in May, And it was the end of May. It was 20 degrees below zero and snow. So it's a very extreme situation to live in, and the students that are there are very aware of their culture. Everything is about the culture and staying in their community. So one of the challenges that we've had is to introduce both science and math to this community. We have several projects. Two are district or Department of Ed, and one is called NAM, which is Native America, and then Americans, and then also an ANAP project. These are grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8, and then we also have a National Science Foundation grant that also works with Hooper Bay and several other communities across Alaska. So these grants are trying to look at locally relevant situations that are working with the communities and trying to infuse science and math where it really doesn't have meaning for the students.
And if you're online or looking at these slides later, I would encourage you to look at the video that was referenced in the previous slide. It's a really good representation of what it means to, think in a Western science way versus. This
was a UPIC graduate student who had gone through Hooper Bay and created this third way of learning video where he says, my life is one way when I'm outside of school, and when I'm in school, it's entirely different. And how do you bridge those two?
Okay, so what happens when, a PI comes to me and says, okay, we need to make a program like this in technology? I mean, we try very hard in all of the things that we do to meet basic UDL accessibility principles, right? We're always looking at contrast, size of buttons, read aloud controls, the ability for students to describe their answers to questions in drawings and speech and typing and so on. And guess what? Most 4th, 5th, 6th graders really can't type very well, as it turns out. So, you can say, yeah, they can type an answer, but they can't. But for this program, we also needed to figure out how to address the needs of an English as a second language community in which the primary language is not really written. Like, there are written representations, but it's not treated or taught as a written language. It's taught as a spoken language. So everything needed to have voiceovers, second contexts. In many cases, the science explanations needed to have second contexts, and we'll show you that in the simulation.
And two of the Department of Ed projects looked at what we had done with Innovative Technologies and Science Inquiry, which was a K through 12 STEM activity list, and wanted to embed some of those. And their biggest drawback is the 5 E's that you mentioned. We add 2 more E's to it. One is looking at the environment, and one is looking at elder conversations. So it really does build in the community and the culture.
Oh, and by the way, did I mention their internet is terrible? So we really have to be careful about asset size. Very important. Both the content of these activities, which Carolyn and her team are responsible for, and the features of the software have to be very carefully constructed. Everything has multiple representations. Everything has, text-to-speech, speech-to-text, which, by the way, we cannot rely on standard browser affordances for, because Google doesn't have enough of a population of UPIC speakers to be able to do a read aloud or an on-the-fly translation like they would in Spanish. So everything has to be custom done by the community.
Back in 2003, when we started UDL work with CAST, we were working with 2 school districts. One was Fresno, California, and one was Anchorage, Alaska. And at that point in time, we only did translations to Spanish, not to any of the Alaskan languages because of that. So it's very interesting that working with translators can be different from one side of a town to another. The dialects are slightly different from family to family even. So it's been a unique challenge.
All right. But we're still trying to do, all the right things, both for education and for accessibility. So, we've developed a set of fairly flexible tools that allow us to display things in multiple modalities, and then we have embedded in here glossaries. This one is showing you the English language version, and I think I have a picture on the next slide.
Yeah, we do have this happens to be the Precipitating Change in Coastal Erosion, which is a National Science Foundation grant. And it's really built on student stories. Instead of us directing what the students learn, they are asked, what do you know about something? What would you like to learn about it? And then take them through some of the models and the sensors and the wave tank and learn about coastal erosion, and then they tell their story at the end. So this is a logbook that was created very different from the NAM and NNEP activities that we have.
Yeah, just an example.
This happens to be a NAM and NNEP activity called Star Navigation, and it's very interesting. If you were to look at the stars, you would see the same stars, but with a very different context when you're looking at the stars. And they use the stars to navigate, to go out to do their hunting, especially during the winter. So one of the things that we did do was to build a simulation, and that simulation included those elder conversations that we talked to and recorded with the locals about what they did when they went out to actually do some hunting. And we were able at the same time to show a glossary that had both the Yankton and the English side. So not only do the translators translate the language, which is, as Leslie already mentioned, hasn't been written down for years and years and years, and it's only the past couple of years that Alaska has insisted they try to write it down so they don't lose their language. But then she also reads it, or he, we have two different translators, read it to the students. So they can go from Yankton to English to English to Yankton and look at words that are oftentimes in science new words to these students.
I can play one of these clips for you just so you get a sense of it.
Environment. Sahbim awatait. Jah damakami unguwalga damakamsu unguwan rilngut.
So every underlined word in a lesson is something that's clickable, and the students can go back and forth to it as many times as they want. So here's an example of the Star Navigation Cultural UDL simulation that we created. They don't use measurements or the North Star like we normally think of it. They use hands for navigation. They also rename the stars and their actual constellations to mean something culturally to them. And so, like we do at the Concord Consortium with these digital applications that we make, it's able to implement these and move from English to Yankton to Yankton to English. And so we put some links in there so you could see those, see the simulation, and you can click on the read aloud in Yankton and be able to even get the instructions in Yankton.
Yeah, so this simulation is actually one of my favorite things that I've built in the last 5 years, honestly, because we still have to teach all about star science, right? Like there's an earth science component here that is very hard, even forget, speaking a different language, forget having a different cultural background. This is stuff that is tough for kids to learn. I somehow thought I would be able to demonstrate this here, but there is a link in these slides, so please go play with it. It's fun, actually, and I personally learned a lot about the solar system and thought about things that I haven't thought about since,
So even though we were building on a whole bunch of activities that we had already tested over 2 NSF grants, and one was a scale-up, we were asked by the teachers to follow their treks. So constellation and hunting was one of them. They go out and they search for those eggs. So bird calls and using the sound grapher was another one. We have now built 20 different activities that either use sensors like temperature, light, sound to implement the treks the teachers wanted to teach to keep the culture.
Yeah, so again, I encourage you to play with this and think about, the challenges involved when you are teaching really two things at once. One is the language of science, and the other is the language of their culture, and trying to do that in a way that is respectful and accessible and speedy and it downloads quickly and, is fun to use and all of these things. So it's been quite an interesting project.
It is really challenging because they read way below grade level, and we're working on with an evaluator and also with a researcher to see. We're in the second year of this project, and we're analyzing the research from the first year. So right now, it appears that the students are reading at higher levels. They're not only typing now their answers, but they can also, when they're asked to respond to a question or to build a drawing, they can also talk about it. So we built that in, so we have a microphone so they can decide. And one of the unique situations that I'll just quickly share is one of the indigenous teachers in Hooper Bay was amazed when she put her kids in groups of 2 or 3 and they worked together on answers. They would click on the microphone and they would practice an answer, and then they'd erase it and they'd do it again and do it again. And when they were satisfied as a group, then they would type their answer in. And it was amazing to her how they really wanted to get it right and to be able to tell their story.
Yeah, and so to wrap up here, I mean, if I had one message for the world, it would be, while we all need to get from the talk this morning into the same space, the internet is a space, and you all need to speak out as we do to the companies that are building these technologies that are supposed to be helping us with affordance problems, to include a larger community, right? I don't think that anybody at Google is really thinking about UDL or the needs of a community like this one.
And I know that we have been working just 2 years, but there are just so many doors that are opening now. So I'm sure that definitely in the future we'll be able to see these tools able to be used by many. And even though Hooper Bay is place-based and it's specifically for Hooper Bay, we also have other communities across Alaska where we've been able to do the same. So it's not that hard to create these very place-based activities.
Yeah, I would imagine some of these things resonate with the folks who are trying to teach and restore Catalan. It's not different, it's the same. Okay, questions?
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. Where do you get your funding?
Well, in Spain and especially in Catalonia, normally we don't have private fundings, and normally are public ones. But in our foundation, we have a private fundings specifically from families that are sensible for this.